Intel, for example, sent this note to all their suppliers, right, warning them about using stuff made in Xinjiang because of this new law. And then basically the Chinese Communist Party started this propaganda campaign against Intel, criticizing them for their stance on Xinjiang. And then Intel apologized, saying, oh, it wasn't about what we think about what's happening in Xinjiang. It was just,
we had to. The U.S. government forced us.
Well, it was kind of like, no, this is just like this is just about what's happening in the U.S. law. We're not making a judgment about it. But Intel's not at the point where they're like, okay, well, we're going to follow U.S. law, and we're going to pull out of China. They're trying to do both still.
Yeah, it's pretty craven. Good on the U.S. government for passing this kind of bill, because it forces these companies to be in a position where, they can't please the Chinese Communist Party. They are forced by U.S. law to do the right thing. And, they can't really, what ultimately is going to happen is companies and countries will have to make a choice of either with China or without China.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be a big turning point when that comes.
It's interesting because some of China's policies may be forcing that to happen as well.
They want it as well from a different
Yeah, I mean, they
perspective.
are decoupling from, the Chinese Communist Party is decoupling from the U.S. financially for a number of reasons. But they're trying to do it while not spooking Wall Street into saying don't invest in China.
Right. I mean, they want to do it on their terms, on their timeline. So you have to decouple, basically from America's perspective, to decouple, basically we'd basically make it illegal for U.S. listed companies or U.S. private companies to be involved in China in various ways. Take China out of the banking system. All right. Take China out of the,
SWIFT.
SWIFT is part of that, right? Money transfer. And basically ban imported products where China's a country of origin, right?
Chinese companies can list on U.S. stock exchanges.
Yeah. Right. There's a few, there's a small handful of key things with well-written laws that could do that. And that, obviously, that's a pretty hardball approach to decoupling. That's what America would do, right? But China wants to eventually decouple from the U.S., but on very different terms, right? China wants to be out of the U.S. banking system, but not the same way, not like by being kicked out. They want to be out by, once the renminbi is a currency that's used, well, it's kind of used as a reserve currency, but not
once it replaces the U.S.
by the
dollar.
IMF, and that's more of a technicality. But once countries trade in RMB, once a large number of countries have based their own digital currency on the RMB digital currency, for example, once the enough parts of the international banking system are using RMB for trade and not converting to dollars first, which, by the way, is what most international currency trade goes from one local currency to U.S. dollars, then back to another currency for trade, say between two countries in Africa or something. But China wants its currency to be part of that, and they need to control the banking system. And once they do that, they're going to have the power to decouple financially. Once China has stolen a sufficient amount of technology, stolen a sufficient amount of, what do you call it, manufacturing know-how, which is not just the technology, but also the skilled labor and managers and equipment that they've developed in-house, right?
Or when they control the shipping lanes of the South China Sea.
Right. So exactly. And so they want to be in a position where they have all these things, and then they can decouple.
Yeah.
Or they might do it a little bit gradually, but essentially...
I mean, I think they're already doing it, but gradually. For example, they started pressuring Chinese companies to delist from Wall Street, from the New York Stock Exchange, and relist in Hong Kong or Shanghai, places that they can control better. Because, for many years, Chinese companies were listing on Wall Street as a way to get a infusion of cash, right, and dollars. But now they want to control the Chinese government wants to control these companies like Didi, Tencent, these big tech companies.
I mean, like if a company like Didi is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, then they are to some degree required to comply with certain U.S. laws and regulations.
Actually, that's not been great because, I mean, this is a problem. During the Trump administration, the SEC was essentially saying that they were going to delist some Chinese companies for not complying to auditing requirements. But the auditing requirements thing has been a problem for like a decade or more.
Right, because basically, while U.S. companies like have to have certain levels of transparency, the same data, the same documents in a Chinese company are considered state secrets by the Chinese
For
government.
private companies.
Right. A totally private company like Huawei or Didi or Alibaba, right? Their internal corporate documents are considered state secrets, and therefore the SEC essentially gave them a pass for auditing. In other words, the SEC didn't require the submission of certain documents that would have proved their financial viability. And this, what was that like Starbucks competitor that had this big problem where they'd faked a bunch of data?
Oh, Luckin Coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, Luckin collapsed, basically.
Right. But like,
it had been listed on the U.S. Stock Exchange, and it lost a lot of people a lot of money.
Right. It lost a lot of Americans a lot of money.
Yeah. But so the Chinese government, though, is now decoupling a lot of Chinese companies from the New York Stock Exchange. So they're starting, right?
Right.
But as they were doing this, Bloomberg, I think, reported that they had a secret meeting. The Chinese government called in like the heads of like JP Morgan and Goldman and like all of these big investment banks, BlackRock, in their Chinese their Chinese subsidiary firms, and brought them in and reassured them that, you know, everything's fine. We're not decoupling, basically trying to keep these investment firms on board into putting more money in China as they were moving their companies out of the U.S.
And they'll throw a bone to like investors, like changing the rules, like allowing foreign companies to now have majority shares in China.
I think JP Morgan has opened a mutual fund. BlackRock has opened a mutual fund in China, and they were allowed to operate them without having to have like a Chinese company as a partner.
Which they previously had to do.
But wouldn't they, under Chinese law, still have to have a Communist Party branch in their Chinese subsidiary?
Yes. And I think also like the money has to stay in China. So
it seems like a sort of liberalization,
invest?
but it's really not. It's part of this greater plan to decouple from the
yeah,
US.
and I think also what the Chinese government is doing with these JP Morgan and things like that, it's more that they're also trying to steal their mutual fund technology in a certain way, like their know-how for how to set up these financial investment vehicles. Because, you know, in China, there's really no place to invest your money other than real estate. Or putting it in a bank, but that does nothing. And so there's not really the infrastructure of like mutual funds, like all these different places to put.
Well, there aren't the reliable ones. Like you have a lot of these loan companies
like
that
the shadow banking stuff.
Yeah, and they pop up and they have like
they're
loan
Ponzi's.
packaging and
they're Ponzi schemes.
A lot of them
essentially.
are. Yeah.
So the Chinese Communist Party realizes that this is a problem because what happens, people get really upset. Like look at what happened with Evergrande, right? People got really upset because they had been buying Evergrande, not just the real estate, but also Evergrande had been doing some kind of like money loan kind of products.
Right.
And then they defaulted on them and people were going and demanding their money back, and it caused like protests.
They should learn from the U.S. banking system, which never crashes.
Well, okay, that aside, what they're trying to do is say, JP Morgan, BlackRock, come in, we'll learn how you operate these things. And then we'll have Chinese companies that do this, and then you're going to get kicked out.
Right. In fairness, the American banking system is less unstable than China's. Not the banking system, the investments. The suite of available investment products to Americans is less unstable than its counterpart in China, right?
I feel like my hand is hovering over the mute button in case you start to talk about the Fed, and then I need to protect our lives.
Okay, let's move on from this topic. But my point was that essentially what's happening to JP Morgan and all these companies, that they're in the honeymoon phase of going into China, and they're about to get their technology stuff.
And they find that the honeymoon is just a honey pot.
Oh.
Close.
What's the right term?
I think it is a honey trap.
A honey trap. Well, I mean, you have the pot of honey with the lid that closes. So that's
the trap.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.